in the Valley, and one of them is Paul Taylor. And I had the pleasure of meeting Paul at the UC Berkeley Faculty Club. One of the very first things that happened to me when I got there. He had tape on his eyelids because his muscles had gotten so weak. And when I first saw him, it was a little, how should I say it, unsettling. Sort of thing. And then he explained, but I do remember very clearly him saying, "Alex, you got to go back to the Valley." And then he said some things like about the bastards there and so forth, but I won't go there. A long time ago, when none of you were born, there was a black and white television show by the name of The Twilight Zone. Oh, you do remember it? You must have saw it on TV Land, you know, that recycles all these old shows. But I remember the first time that I was driving on Interstate 5. It had just opened, but it stopped at 152 going north. And I remember going on Interstate 5. It was dark. I was coming back from the San Joaquin Valley from my hometown of Madera, because I'm a country boy in that respect. And I remember a Twilight Zone program where the guy kept driving. It kept saying 5 miles, Ripon, 5 miles, Manteca, 5 miles, Tracy. And they never showed up because it seemed that's all there was, just blackness. So when the Patterson exit included a Wendy's, if I recall, and a service station, I was so happy to see it because I kept thinking I was never going to get to the end of that freeway. And 152, none of you remember this, it had 3 lanes at one time. 2 lanes going in each direction, and the middle lane was to pass. And inevitably, especially on foggy days, guess what happened? It was known as Blood Alley in that respect. And it was terrifying to drive on 152, and you prayed you got to 101, and then after that, I-5. One of my first jobs, I was around 5 years old, was picking cotton. It was a very important time for those of us who worked in the fields, because by picking cotton, you pick primera, and then segunda, and especially in the early days where some farmers tried to yield a little more, and they had tercera, as they called it, and then you pick bola. All of this, of course, is Greek to most of my students. But when the machines came in, around 10,000 people who worked the fields had a piece of their work rhythm erased. So by 1958, less than 3% of the cotton picked in the San Joaquin Valley was picked by hand. So what happened to those 10,000 workers during that period of time? Last night, I was on Sisk Road going to the Hampton Inn, and I remembered Bernie Sisk, one of the first Democrats I ever voted for. But what blew me away is occasionally from I-5, I take the 2-lane road and cut across to get to 99 to go see family and friends in the Madera-Fresno area. Holy moly, it was one strip mall until I got to the road here that turned left and I ended up at the Hampton Inn. You know how big Modesto has gotten? When you stretch it out like that, where is the overlapping consensus? I'll get to that. I came on the train last night because I was scared to death of the traffic coming from the San Francisco Bay Area to get to Modesto at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had to give a lecture yesterday, and it was over around 3:15, went home, packed a few things, and I said, there is no way I'm going to tackle that traffic. The train now, there's a train you can take from Livermore, and eventually it's going to get to where Mario now currently lives, I assume, in Merced. I'm assuming you're not living in La Grande or Planada, where I picked tomatoes a long time ago. Commuters begin from Patterson, Manteca, Tracy, etc., around 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'm an early riser, hora ranchera. I still have that syndrome. I get up, I'm weird that way. And there is traffic coming from Tracy, Manteca, Patterson, and so on, going to the valley. Los Baños, 5 a.m. People are leaving Los Baños to get to 101, to get to Silicon Valley or areas of that sort. So these are forces of change that are shrinking common ground in many respects, meaning that those concentric circles that Andrew in my opinion, accurately portrayed on the screen, that consensus in many respects is shrinking. So we have a chance to, in a sense, capture that overlapping consensus, but it's a race in certain respects against time. And let me talk very quickly about those forces. The first is technology, and I alluded to that when I mentioned about the cotton picking machines and so on. For anyone who's worked in the fields, think about all of those tasks that are now being done by machines. Mechanical picking of grapes is just one of those, and I could give a bunch of other examples and so on, but I want to have time to talk about the second one. One is the economic geography of the valley is changing. Who would ever think that Madera ranchos would become the edge of the Fresno metropolitan area? Madera ranchos was this godforsaken place in the eastern side of Madera County, where people had projected a subdivision that never existed for years. That's where I had my first date. It was dark, there were no lights, perfect first date. I had to wait 23 years for the second one, but that's why I remember it so well. And I remember it because that was the first time I kissed a young woman. And then, well, we have to keep this PG rated. Okay. The gravity of the San Francisco Bay Area then is sucking large numbers of people from the eastern side of the northern valley. On the southern end of the valley, it's southern Kern County, the gravitational pull of Southern California, Redlands, Palmdale, etc. A lot of people have moved to Southern Kern Valley because of housing and so on, but really they are thinking Magic Mountain and other things of that nature. And there's localized manifestations of this process. Who would ever think Madera ranchos would be, as I mentioned earlier, really part of Fresno? And that Selma and Fowler were really basically part of Fresno. That is, where these towns have become Fresno-centric. In Madera, if you want a prom dress, you don't shop for it in Madera, you go to Fresno. And there was a time where going to Fresno was huge for me as some kid in Madera, going to my first elevator at the J.C. Penney's downtown Fresno, where they had the little wire thing, and there was a guy there who went over with the lever, and you went up on the second floor. Holy moly. All right, you get the idea. So Delano is really part of Bakersfield now. Porterville is really part of Visalia. In that sense, the space in the valley has been reconfigured. Then I'll mention something we all know about, the demographic changes in the valley. White population going down, Latino population going up, proportionately to the other populations in that respect. And the others, who are these others? You know, multiculturalism implicitly presumes, especially if you've never really read the text that Andrew mentioned, discrete cultures. Latino culture, Black culture, Hmong culture, Cambodian culture. All these cultures are changing within themselves. Many of my Mexican American students are taking Spanish because they don't know Spanish. Not to mention Oaxacans in Madera County who had to learn Spanish in order to participate in the bilingual program, and so on. These discrete cultures are in fact changing We have a middle-class Latinos, we have farm worker Latinos, we have Oaxacans and so on. In the Bay Area, we have Mayans and so on. They're not Mexicans, they're Mayan. They're not Mexican, they're Oaxacan. And we have a student group at Berkeley called La Federación Estudiantil de Oaxaqueños. And then they translated it into Mixtec. We have the global and the local, and May's presentation in particular mentioned this. We have remittances being sent from the San Joaquin Valley by the tens of thousands of dollars at the same time that we have subdivisions that are being built that locally are changing the landscape of places like Modesto, for example. So where do we get a sense of neighborhood then? When we have a situation, as what happened with the Great Recession. 66%, there was a decline of 60% of median household income among Latinos in the San Joaquin Valley. Next in line were Asians, 64% loss of median household wealth. Next came African Americans, 54% loss of median households and so on. What does this mean? It means, among other things, residential instability. People looking for a cheaper rent. 1 year over here, 6 months over there, 2 years over here. How do you build neighborhood? How do you build a sense of school when your kids are going to a different school every 2 or 3 years? So the PTA changes, the context of the school changes, and the like. Opportunity structures are changing. Blue Diamond, Gallo, standard work, stable work, and so on. But think about all the companies, small in particular, that no longer exist. Madera lived for a time on Oberti olives, the biggest canning processing plant next to Lindsay olives. They're gone now. It saved my family because my parents eventually became full-time workers there in their mid to late 40s and this sort of thing. Joined a union for the first time. It's gone. The reduction of the winery in Madera. A lot of those winery workers that were able to become lower middle class who had been farm workers, no longer there. My time is running up. Okay, the big one. The resegregation of the valley. Modesto Beat in March 2016, front page story about the resegregation that's taking place in the valley. It is a resegregation by race and class. It's happening in all of the larger metro areas of the valley in that respect. So what we have is really 4 different valleys. Kerman, Mendota, Tranquility, San Joaquin, these tiny little towns, they still exist. There is still a Houston. There is still a Planada. There is still a little town outside of Bakersfield called Shafter. And I always used to joke about it. If you want to get shafted, go live in Shafter. With all due respect. We have a political divide. The 2 most right-wing candidates in the June primary in terms of the Republican Party were the ones who won the most. 84% of the Republicans voted for Trump and for Ted Cruz. A political divide. The voting for Obama versus Romney. 1% difference. But in the state, it was 16-point difference. So the valley is different. It's a sea of red for the most part. So how do you participate in the discussion to create consensus? And let me end with this point. UC Berkeley right now is the most selective university, most selective ever in the history of the University of California at Berkeley. less than 18% of the students who apply get in. The transfer rate from Modesto Junior College, and I'm not picking on MJC because I'm here. Believe me, Fresno is worse, West Hills College is worse, and we could go on, is around 35% that combines the graduation rate with the transfer rate. So how do you get to a point to participate in the discussion to create consensus when you are still dealing with overcoming what happened to you in high school? In that sense, there is so much potential and promise here. How do we unearth that promise and potential? I was very lucky, and I'm not saying this to brag in any way and this sort of thing. I was selected to be a visiting professor at the Sorbonne. Almost 30 years before, when I was still a graduate student working on my dissertation, I got to go to an academic conference there. And I remember opening the window of my hotel overlooking the Champs-Élysées. Many years later now, while I'm at Berkeley, because I asked myself then, and I asked myself subsequently when I was a visiting professor, how did a short, overweight Mexican kid who grew up in the fields of the San Joaquin Valley end up here in Paris? My daughter was in bed when I left because I had to leave so early, San Francisco airport, down to San Diego, drive to where I was going. And this was the Imperial Valley, and I was going to Imperial Valley College that had sent one student in 5 years to the University of California. No transfer rate to speak of. And my daughter asked me, because I kissed her on the cheek, she woke up, Daddy, Papi, ¿dónde vas? Where are you going? And I said, I'm going to Brawley, California, because that's where I stayed that night. And she said, where is that? I told her, it's near Paris. Thank you.